Bloom's taxonomy is a classification system used to distinguish different levels of thinking. It was created in 1956 by Benjamin Bloom, and it is still used widely today. The 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy describe progressively higher levels of cognitive activity. Although it was designed for post-secondary schools, it has also been used extensively in elementary schools and in gifted education. The goal of Bloom's taxonomy was and is to help researchers and educators develop different levels of prompts and questions that could be used to build curricula and tests. Nearly 50 years after its development, Anderson and Krathwohl revised Bloom's taxonomy. Seaman noted that a standout in the revision is the change in categories from noun form to verb form. Additionally, evaluating, which was evaluation in the original iteration, was lowered to the second highest level of thinking in the hierarchy, while creating, synthesis in the original version, was raised to the highest level of thinking. The Internet has numerous examples of both the old and new versions of Bloom's taxonomy. Whether I am asking questions at the synthesis or the evaluation level, for the purpose of praxis, I am still asking higher level questions. Different verbs are associated with each level of Bloom's. On this list, the verbs range from remembering verbs on the left to creating verbs on the right. These verbs are used to write objectives, questions, and prompts. The most interesting and most efficient way I know of to show you how easy it is to use Bloom's taxonomy is to demonstrate its use with a story that I hope is familiar to all. I'm going to revisit Goldilocks and the Three Bears through a series of questions and prompts based on each of the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. I will pause occasionally for you to apply Bloom's taxonomy to your own content area. The remembering level of Bloom's taxonomy is a foundational level of thinking. At this level, questions and prompts are easy and straightforward. Answers can usually be regurgitated in single words or short phrases from material read. No creative thinking takes place. This level is helpful for a quick recall of details, definitions, and facts. Here are my remembering prompts from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Please respond to the prompts mentally. List the characters in the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Recall what the bears were eating for breakfast. Describe where the story takes place. Notice what happened as you thought about these questions. You probably found that the answers could be stated in 1 or 2 words, and that they came to you rather quickly, assuming, of course, that you are familiar with the story. This is because remembering level questions are straightforward and require surface level thinking. Consider the examples I just gave you. Did you notice that I embedded the verbs in capital letters within each prompt? This is my own little trick when using Bloom's taxonomy. I always write the embedded verbs in capital letters. This is my way of double-checking that the prompt I wrote really does match my intended level of Bloom's. If I don't embed the actual verbs, it is too easy for me to work at what I call a sounds like level, meaning this sounds like analyzing, when really it is a remembering question. Embedding the verb in the prompt keeps me more accurate in my use of Bloom's taxonomy. I also almost always write prompts rather than questions. I've found that Bloom's questions can get messy and vague, and that vague questions can lead to vague answers. It's far too easy to ask the question, "Can you describe where the story takes place?" To which some of my 5th graders would always say, "Yes," but that answer doesn't really tell me that much. On the other hand, describe where the story takes place is more of a command. If the command is followed accurately, I will know if the student actually remembered the material. I use the same process for each level of Bloom's taxonomy. First, I decide what verbs I want to use. Then I embed the verbs in a prompt or question about the story, or in your case, your content area. I always write the embedded verb in capital letters. Try it. Think about a topic in your content area. You will return to that topic repeatedly during this presentation. On the next slide, you will see a list of remembering verbs. Decide what verbs you want to use from the remembering list, then embed each verb in a prompt or question about your topic. Then write several questions or prompts for remembering. You may wish to pause the video while you do this. Now would be a good time to pause the video so that you can write your prompts. The understanding level is also a foundational level of thinking. Questions and prompts are only slightly more difficult than those at the remembering level, and they can usually be answered with phrases or short sentences. Very little, if any, creative thinking takes place. This level is helpful for checking for understanding. Here are my understanding prompts from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Please respond mentally to each prompt. Explain why the bears went for a walk. Give an example of something Goldilocks did that might upset Baby Bear. Restate what Goldilocks said about each bear's bowl of porridge. Notice what happened as you thought about these questions. You probably found that the questions could still be answered fairly quickly, but the answers required more words. This is because understanding level questions require just a little more thinking. Again, it's your turn. As before, think about the same topic from your content area, the one you used to write the remembering questions. Decide what verbs you want to use from the understanding level. Then embed each verb in a prompt or question about your topic. Write several prompts or questions for understanding. You may wish to pause the video again while you do this. The applying level of Bloom's taxonomy begins to cross the bridge from foundational knowledge to higher level knowledge and higher level thinking. Questions are slightly more difficult than those at the remembering and understanding level, but typically they can no longer be answered with phrases or short sentences. Furthermore, they usually involve a doing action. Creative thinking begins to take place as students apply what they have learned at the previous two levels. The applying level is helpful for assessing the transfer of knowledge to a setting beyond discussion and written answers. Here are my applying prompts from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Again, please respond mentally to each prompt. Dramatize the scene in which the bears return home and find that Goldilocks has been in their house. Compute the total cost of the damages caused by Goldilocks. Paint a picture of your favorite scene from the story. Notice that for this level, students have to do something with their knowledge. Their knowledge has to be interpreted and acted upon. The examples given are very elementary tasks, as they were intended to be for this presentation. Indeed, I've found that the applying level can sometimes seem like busy work or too elementary for higher education, depending on the content area. In higher ed, I've learned that it depends on how, when, and where I use the applying level. It's likely that a science instructor would use applying in their labs. For example, draw and label a picture of a cell, but maybe not so much during lectures. In my own courses, I've had my students draw a diagram that shows the process of identifying a student for special education. I've had them categorize professional vocabulary into labeled groups. In my study skills course each semester, I have the students use a VCSU webpage on tuition costs, and I encourage them to calculate the cost of missing 1 hour of class. I can tell you that last year it was between $26 and $42. They always remember that lesson. You'll probably have to experiment with the applying level to see how, when, and where it best fits into your courses. It's your turn again. You'll probably want to pause the video while you try writing some prompts. The analyzing level of Bloom's taxonomy is the first level that fully involves higher level thinking. Analyzing involves the taking apart of concepts, making it a fairly necessary prelude to the next two levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Here are my analyzing prompts from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Compare the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears with the story Little Red Riding Hood. Break down Goldilocks and the Three Bears into separate scenes. Diagram the characters in Goldilocks and the Three Bears and the items from the story that belong to each. By now, you know the routine, so go ahead and pause the video and write your prompts. The evaluating level of Bloom's taxonomy is the second highest level of thinking. Remember, in terms of determining which level of thinking is higher, synthesis or evaluation, or today, creating or evaluating, I think splitting hairs and debating the issue is counterproductive. Personally, and I'm truly being opinionated here, and that should be no surprise. I feel that as long as teachers are asking questions and involving students in learning experiences at the higher levels of Bloom's, we needn't be too concerned about what level is the highest position. Here are my evaluating prompts from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Judge whether or not Goldilocks should be arrested for breaking and entering. Evaluate how much Goldilocks should pay for damages. Defend Goldilocks' decision to enter a home that did not belong to her. I have to laugh because even when I've given these questions to adults when I've been training them on Bloom's taxonomy, the discussion can go on forever for each of these questions, and there's quite a bit of arguing actually. It's your turn again, and we're almost finished. And my hope is that by the time you've finished writing all of these prompts, you'll be able to use them next week or whenever you teach the content area. The creating level is the highest level of Bloom's, and at one point Bloom himself suggested that he wished he had put 7 levels, the second creating level above evaluation. So when Anderson and Krathwohl revised it, it seemed logical to put creating at the top. My understanding is that the rationale for moving creating to the top came from work with technology. Here are my creating prompts from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Compose a song about Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Suppose Goldilocks and the Three Bears were rewritten as Goldilocks and the Three Fish. How would the story be different? Write that story. Finally, invent a device that would have prevented Goldilocks from sampling the bear's porridge. This is the last one. Ready, set, go. As the questions moved to higher levels, did you also notice that when you thought about possible answers, you began to reflect more and maybe even to smile? I noticed the smiles a lot in the classroom when we were at the higher levels because frankly, they're more fun, they're more engaging. Bloom suggested that higher level thinking leads to deeper reflection. In my own experiences, I've watched students not only reflect more, but as I said, smile more when I ask questions from the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Woke concludes, quote, "Joy and learning are not mutually exclusive. Many of our greatest joys in life are related to our learning," unquote. Rees posits that joyful learning leads to success for students at all levels and with differing abilities. As instructors, we often hear that we should use Bloom's to ask questions of students. However, research suggests that teaching students how to use Bloom's taxonomy to ask questions in your class or of you can lead to increased student engagement, with students asking more and deeper questions about course material. For this reason, I have always taught my elementary and middle school students to use Bloom's taxonomy, and I always posted the different levels of Bloom's with their verbs on my wall. Class discussions were much more engaging when I could say, turn to your neighbor and generate an evaluating question for the article you just read. Then I asked the students to share and discuss the questions that had been generated. For the record, I've also taught my university studies students how to question lecture concepts with Bloom's, though I am not sure they've been brave enough to risk using this skill in class. Bloom's taxonomy can be used to write objectives, to prompt discussions. It can be used on study guides, on quizzes and tests, as a foundation for an individual or group project, and to teach students how to ask questions. Since Bloom's taxonomy has been around for over half a century, this presentation was probably more of a review for you. The fact that after all these years Bloom's taxonomy is still being studied and promoted as a tool for effective teaching attests to its effectiveness. I hope you'll consider these and other ways you can use Bloom's taxonomy in your course.